The Dragonflight beta is out, meaning Shadowlands is over. It's time we say goodbye to a lot of characters, some more expected than others. Among one of those characters seems to be Anduin Wren. Dialogue at the end of the expansion as well as text from Dragonflight leaves it pretty clear the king needs a break. So before we say goodbye to Anduin for a while, I wanted to explore an aspect of his character that remains more debated. Let's talk about Anduin being gay. So first we need to talk about queer coding. What is it and why does it exist? Queer coding is when a character is not explicitly confirmed as queer but has enough subtext for an audience to read them as queer, usually through certain stereotypical traits and behaviors. This isn't necessarily intentional or negative, but it can be problematic. Why does it exist? In 1915, the Supreme Court ruled that films weren't protected by the First Amendment. To protect themselves from outside censorship, Hollywood came up with a self-imposed code to regulate moral content shown in movies. The Motion Picture Production Code, or the Hays Code, was born. The code specified no perversion or deviance, which homosexuality fell into, and if you did show a queer character, they had to be punished by the end of the code specifying that the audience's sympathy couldn't be on the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. This, unfortunately, has led to the development of many harmful tropes such as the sissy villain or gay villain trope or the bury your gays trope, something you see often in Disney movies like with Scar, Ursula, Hades, etc. But it has also led to a long history of queer people being unable to do anything more than queer code according to the Hays Code. Even though the Hays Code is no longer in effect, its legacy shapes how we make and consume content now. Characteristics that have long been associated with queerness are now synonymous with villainy or sin in media today. Looking at more recent Disney movies, though, specifically Frozen, you can see queer coding start to change some. Audiences still picked up on Elsa's potential queerness, but it's not necessarily in her behaviors or appearance that indicates this, it's in Elsa's story. She hides who she is from the world until she's confronted by her sister and her secret is revealed. She runs away, ready to embrace her true self. It has been pointed out over and over again that Let It Go is a coming out song. People try to hunt her down purely because of who she is and not because of anything she's actually done wrong, and the ending to her story is her reuniting with her sister and her kingdom accepting and embracing who she is. And of course, her having no love interest in Frozen when it's what we've come to expect with the Disney princess brand, yes, I know she's a queen, has given us all we really need to speculate. With a lack of real LGBTQ plus characters and queer erasure happening with Disney villains in recent years, it's no surprise that the LGBTQ plus community has claimed Elsa, and all of this brings me back to Anduin Wren. Anduin isn't a character that I see as queer-coded because of any stereotypical characteristics he possesses. I know there's a lot of debating in the community about it, and I will get back to it. I just think, like Elsa, it's in his story. Anduin's story starts with him as a young boy trying to look after a kingdom his father is unable to. Soon, he starts to grow up and we get an idea of the type of person he is and wants to be. In a world full of racism, war, and hatred, Anduin is a rarity that wants peace and prosperity for all people, not just his kingdom. This is a trait that we come to see at the core of Anduin's identity, and one that inherently puts him at odds with the world around him, his people, and especially his own father. And now you start to see the queer themes in his story just like Elsa. We get a similar thing with his combat training. Anduin is being trained to be like a warrior, to be like his dad, but his real calling is priesthood. Varian and Anduin have numerous arguments about that. Varian even implied it was a phase at one point.
I mean, have you tried not being a slayer?
Mom.
An overbearing parent refusing to accept a child as they are and pushing them into other lifestyles is a very familiar concept to queer people. So we have Anduin rejecting the norms of his society, and especially of his family, to be his own person and walk his own path. And as a teenager, not only does he become more skilled with the light, but he grows more sure of himself in his quest for peace. He visits Pandaria, gets all his bones shattered by Garrosh, and that's still not enough for him to give up hopes of peace with the Horde. It's also here in Pandaria that Anduin starts to develop a friendship with Rathian, an uncorrupted black dragon hatched in Kata. Rathian offers Anduin a unique companionship, not only being similar age to Anduin, those dragon years work weird, but also with a similar burden to Anduin. Rathian, just like Anduin, has the weight of the world on him. He's tasked with protecting the world due to his lineage, similar to how Anduin became king of the Alliance, and he has all this pressure not to turn out like his family. The legacy of his father, Deathwing, hangs over him like a ghost, and while Anduin's dad is very much alive at this point, the shadow of Varian's legacy is no lighter a weight on his shoulders. Rathian and Anduin are both determined not to become their dads. There are obvious differences, like their relationship with their dads, but the circumstances of their lives are something really only shared with each other at this point. This relationship between them is elaborated upon further in the novel War Crimes by Christie Golden, which probably gives us some of the most blatant subtext between these two. War Crimes is a novel about the trial of Garrosh Hellscream in Pandaria and is the lead-up novel to Warlords of Draenor. During this trial, scenes from the past are played alongside witness testimony using the Vision of Time. During these testimonies, it is revealed to Varian that Anduin has not only met with a Horde faction leader, Bane, but was actually friends with him and gave him Fearbreaker. Fearbreaker was the weapon given to him by Magni before he turned into a diamond, and at the time of Warcraft, he's still a diamond, so it's a big deal. Varian starts to get angry with both Anduin and Jaina, and they argue, and he calms down slightly by the end of the talk, but still remains mad and not understanding his son. Anduin leaves, and eventually Wrathion finds him and sits for a talk, and Anduin makes a comment about his dad and Aunt Jaina not wanting him to talk to Wrathion. I wonder why. Wrathion says he's ready to break Anduin out of prison, and Varian threw him in there, specifying, "Just wanted to make sure you knew that," which is not just foreshadowing for later. Anduin talks seriously to Wrathion for a while he tries to lighten the situation with jokes and dramatic effect. Eventually, Anduin says that he's tired of everything and stuck, and Wrathion remarks, "When I'm a little older, I shall, if asked politely, take you on my back and ferry you to fascinating places where we will have adventures that will age your father 10 years in one night." Okay, I'm not even sorry, but that's gay.
You got all this from one episode?
It's subtext, Steven.
Anduin replies that sounds wonderful, and they start a fire and settle into a game. Now, I'm sure most people can pick up on the queer subtext there, but if you didn't, I'll explain. This boy just ran off to his only friend that understands him after a fight with his dad about not accepting him. Then this boy's friend tells him that when they're old enough, they'll travel the world and have the kind of adventures that would drive his dad crazy. That's gay. So the novel ends with Wrathion kind of betraying everybody and starting Wad off, but for good reason, ? So if you're wondering why Anduin punches him in the face in 8.3 and he just takes it like a champ, there you go. So Wad happens like barely, and then we're into Legion. Varian dies, and Anduin has to come to terms with being king and losing his dad. And it's all very emotional and pretty well done. Anduin even picks up his dad's weapon to wield, a warrior's weapon, and he takes this piece of his dad, but is still determined to rule with peace. Like a real acceptance of who he is for himself. Not much to say about that. The next instance of queer subtext that really struck out to me, though, was in yet another Christie Golden novel, Before the Storm. This is the story leading into BFA. Anduin is doing a lot of alliance business, traveling to all of his people's different lands, holding funerals, having long discussions with Gim multiple times in the book about an heir and a wife. Each time Gim brings this up, Anduin is completely uncomfortable. It is said it's about not wanting to marry someone he doesn't love, but there seems to be more to it. There's nothing wrong with that reasoning, but his reaction to this conversation is more discomfort than unwillingness. It's the discomfort of being put in a box you don't fit into. Anduin doesn't fit into this box of what Gin thinks a king should be and do, and even if he is straight, the queer reading is clearly there. Now, when we finally saw Anduin and Wrathion meet up again, a much longed-for reunion, Wrathion literally walks straight into the throne room, hot, sassy, the whole fit. Wrathion is just oozing confidence. Anduin walks up and punches him in the face, and Wrathion just takes it, saying he deserved that. There's a little scene where they're face to face, and I keep expecting them to kiss, but they don't, but they should have. There was also a scene data mined in 8.3 that never made it into the game, so it's not technically canon, but it does lend to the overall idea that Anduin is queer. Wowhead found a conversation between Kalik and Wrathion about the difficulty of having relationships with humans. This conversation goes, "Kalikos, I am told you entered a relationship with a human." Well, it is complicated. Humans can often be. Like all mortals, they are fickle beings, yet they hold great promise. From what I've been told, certain mortals might say the same about you. Complicated indeed. What human would he be talking about? Could it be the only human he's ever been shown to talk to? Let's give it back to canon now with Shadows Rising, Madeline Rue's book that leads into the Shadowlands. Towards the end of the book, Anduin disguises himself as a commoner and basically sneaks out. He wants to escape the pressures that come with being himself, having to be king so young, losing his dad, etc. So Anduin gives himself the name Jarek and heads to the inn. When a barmaid approaches him, it is noted that she is pretty attractive, with the type of smile that would make another boy blush. But not Anduin? It isn't until he remembers that he's pretending to be someone else that he gives himself permission to blush. There are different ways that you could read this. Maybe he has to give himself permission to blush and such because he doesn't see it as kingly or something, but that seems kind of odd. Anduin is pretending to be someone else, like a form of escapism or something from his life, or role-playing. There's an argument to be made here that he's faking his interests as well as his identity here, like he's blushing at a girl while pretending to be someone else. It's just kind of weird. Now, there have been bits data mined mentioning Wrathion and Anduin for Dragonflight, but until anything concrete comes in the actual expansion, this is pretty much all we get. Shadowlands left in time for Anduin, actual Anduin, limited. But I wanted to get into some of the arguments that I see in the community against the idea of making Anduin queer and why they're stupid. 1. Making Anduin gay is toxic masculinity. Now, I wanted to get into this one first because I see it the most, even by content creators I respect. So I thought it was pretty important to challenge this idea. First, I want to point out that a lot of people saying this aren't saying it in bad faith. I think they notice a real problem with the way masculinity is presented in WoW, but are wrong for using that as a reason not to have queer rep. I 100% believe that there are people on different forums and comment sections calling Anduin gay simply because he wants peace and is sensitive. But I think, as I've laid out in my video, that's clearly not the reason I read him as queer. The solution isn't to tell queer people that they can't have rep where they can find it, but to have more than literally one man be sensitive and emotional in your entire universe. WoW has a large cast of male characters to do this with. Doing it with the one man they accidentally queer-coded is not the big progressive move we want to think it is. Do we think it's on queer people that the boys who cry are gay stereotype exists? Is it on us to stop asking for representation because of that? I really don't think so. And further on that point, do sensitive queer men not deserve to see themselves in media because toxic masculinity exists? I would just urge y'all to ask yourselves what you're actually saying when you bring up this point. Like, I watch Steven Universe, I know boys who cry can like women, it's not about that. 2. Why does Anduin need to be sexual / have a sexuality? I'm fine if they want to make Anduin Arrow Ace outside of the fact that Rathian and Anduin are literally the only ship I care about, but I don't know how to tell you that it's still LGBTQIA. Like, what do you think the A is for? Allies? But since you asked, here's a list of canon couples in WoW that no one batted an eye at. Huh, weird. 3. He has to have an heir. He literally doesn't. WoW actually has a distinct lack of children in the lore right now. Thrall and Moira are the only 2 faction leaders that have children that are still actually children, if I remember correctly. And there are only a few more faction leaders that have adult kids, mostly on Alliance side. Tyrande daughter is adopted. There's nothing to suggest that an heir needs to be biological or that one even needs to be picked out before you die. Look at the Horde leadership right now, which actually makes the scenes we're gonna stressing over it in the books just for Anduin to be uncomfortable even weirder to include. Most of the faction leaders, especially for Horde, don't have ready heirs. In fact, let's make a checklist. So yeah, until y'all have this energy for Bane or Lorthamar, who have been leaders for way longer and deserve a little bit more focus, I don't believe y'all. 4. Rathian is literally a child, therefore shipping them is problematic. This is completely bad faith and absolutely devoid of intelligence. Rathian is over 6 years old in WoW lore, but Rathian is also a different species. I don't call my 3-year-old dog a toddler, why would I do that with a dragon? Not only that, but Rathian said he was conscious in his egg, so he's mentally older than his hatching. Everything from the way they've aged up both his human and dragon models to the way he speaks shows that he's an adult. Here's Rathian himself even pointing out that there's a difference between human and dragon years.
Are you lecturing me? You're what, 2 years old?
2 in dragon years. It is your move.
So take your homophobic bad faith argument somewhere else because the lore itself disagrees with you. I'm sure there are more arguments flying around about Anduin specifically, but I wanted to refute the ones that I see going around the most. There's actually a 5th issue people bring up in relation to this topic, but I think it's bigger than Anduin, so I wanted to give it its own time in my final thoughts and conclusion to this whole thing. So for the last part, I wanted to tackle 2 things that are basically the same argument. Why do we need to know they're queer? / why do we need so many queer characters all of a sudden? And these 2 questions are basically saying the same thing in my opinion. Why are gay people in my game? And honestly, what does representation come down to in this game? It wasn't until very recently that we got anything more than WoW's version of Pixar lesbian background characters, and for all the progress Shadowlands has made in representation, it feels like it's not going to matter. Fairshell was confirmed in books with no real hint of it in game. Chromie was confirmed as transgender, but that was only a book that's maybe canon, maybe not. And in that same book, we get another transgender character, but she only ever appears in this one story, and the same can be said about the lesbian mermaid couple. Pelagos is a transgender man who we get to quest alongside through Shadowlands, which is amazing, but a large part of that is only through the Covenant campaign. I get the overall feeling he's going to stay in Shadowlands as we move on. And the same can be said about the gay Night Warrior couple in Ardenweald. Most of their significance is in the Covenant campaign, and they're staying there when we leave. When we leave Shadowlands, what representation are we taking with us? This ties into the larger point I wanted to make with my comparison to Frozen earlier. Blizzard, much like Disney, only wants to give us the crumbs when it comes to representation and then seems almost irritated when we want to use those crumbs to feed ourselves. I think going forward, Blizzard really has to commit more to representation all around, not just queer rep. WoW clearly has a huge race issue it needs to address as well, and they really need to look at who they have decided is the main cast for WoW and how they've treated those characters. A lot of people playing the game these days grew up with some of them. Anduin was older than me when I started playing. We were teenagers at the same time. It wasn't until the last couple years that I aged past him because WoW moves at half speed, but I guess now we're the same age. WoW came out in 2004, and it's 2022. As it approaches its 20th anniversary in a couple years, it needs to decide if it wants to adapt to the current culture or if it's content becoming a relic of its time.